I spent the last 7 years running an organization that I'd started called Venture for America, and we helped create about 3,000 jobs in Detroit, Cleveland, St. Louis, Birmingham, New Orleans, other cities around the country. And I saw that we're pouring water into a bathtub that has a giant hole ripped in the bottom, and that for every 5, 10, 50 jobs that my entrepreneurs are going to create, we're going to lose 5, 10, 50,000 jobs.
Känner King Rapio?
It's not this cliff that we're heading towards. It's actually more of a curve that we're on. What I've been telling people is that we're in the third inning now. Where one of the main reasons why Donald Trump won in 2016 is that we automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs that were based in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, Missouri, Iowa, all the swing states you needed to win in the center of the country. And a lot of that was just manufacturing work. And if you go to a factory, you'll see it's just giant robot arms as far as the eye can see. So it's not just that you have artificial intelligence on the horizon. It's that we've been eating away at the most common jobs in the U.S. economy for almost 20 years now, and it's just now hitting a point where it's pushing more and more unskilled men in particular out of the workforce.
Sorry, I saw a bunch of Asian people.
What, really?
Yeah, there's
Bam?
there's 3 of them standing right there, and there's another guy walking with AirPods in.
Oh, agents with AirPods? Hi, I'm Andrew Yang, and I'm the candidate for the 2020 presidential election for the Democratic Party. My major advocacy is for universal basic income, otherwise known as UBI.
And what is universal basic income?
UBI is this system where the federal government just gives you money, like no strings attached, just free money every month, like for anybody ages 18 or older. $1,000 to this person and another person, no strings attached, same thing. So $12,000 annually.
And how are your plans to implement this?
My plans to implement this is obviously to let people know that, listen, you know, AI technology is rapidly developing, and that in that case, the vast majority of American workers will be displaced by these machines and AI. So when that happens, there's going to be a large number of structurally unemployed. Now, how are they going to live if they don't have a job? So UBI will be the perfect plan to help these people that are being displaced. So when I obtain the win for the Democratic nominee, and then eventually, hopefully, presidency, I am going to encourage Congress to realize that the American economy is evolving.
And how much is this going to cost?
For the federal government, or
yeah, and where are we going to get the money from?
Okay, so number one, we are going to get the money from a new tax plan that I've been advocating also, which is also otherwise known as the VAT tax. So the VAT tax is where every step of the way from producer to the consumer is being taxed. So for example, let's say a business is making phones, for example. So every component that is being sold to Apple there will be a sales tax every step along the way. So that's gonna be how we are paying for it.
All right. And what are the benefits going to be like for the people that end up receiving the universal basic income?
There's a multitude of benefits. Number one is that workers will have a larger bargaining power. So they don't have to deal with like companies not paying them enough or something like that. They are allowed to negotiate and will negotiate more with the business owner. Another benefit would be the fact that their health and their mental health would be better. Like they're receiving more money. They don't have to worry about like financial stresses, or they don't have to worry about, oh, what if something happened that I'm not able to afford that like medical plan or medical payment. And a third major benefit would also be the fact that they will also be encouraged to be entrepreneurs. Since they're getting money every month, they have an increased capital of starting new businesses in many different industries. That is currently what I'm doing with Venture for America, and that I'm helping all these young adults to start their own businesses, and UBI would just simply help facilitate that process.
And you said for the people in AI is taking over their jobs. Mm-hmm. So for the people that do lose their jobs to AI and they receive the UBI, mm-hmm. but they're only getting $12,000 a year mm-hmm. while they're trying to look for a job, and some of them might have families. How is that extra $12,000 a year gonna help in the long run?
Okay, so they're gonna help simply because like they have $1,000 each month, right? $12,000 annually. So that would push them to like reskill. They allows them to like go into different educational programs such as coding, which I think it needs to be more popular within educational systems as well. So having $1,000 a month allows them to go into these reskilling programs. So in the long run, as you have stated, more people will be more geared towards that like AI technological economy that we are currently that we are changing into.
All right. So with that, what happens when they get the money? Like they're gonna obviously have more surplus of money and like mm-hmm. able to spend it more. What's gonna happen then to our economy and prices and everything else? Like it's not going to be as cheap anymore. What's going to happen?
Okay, so basically your question is asking about when this caused inflation, right?
Yes.
Okay, so in the '08 recession, the government bailed out banks with like a huge amount of money. That did not cause any rampant inflation, and in addition to that, we are using money that's already in the economy. So we aren't really like printing off money or anything like that. But in reality, like prices would go up, but because of competition between companies, one company obviously wants more business than the other. That's how companies survive. So because of competition, they would keep the prices in check. Because if they were too high, obviously consumers wouldn't go to the company to purchase their goods and services.
All right, so then now people get this extra $1,000 a month. So like mm-hmm. people 18 years old and older.
Yes.
And those 18-year-olds, they could be heavy alcohol, marijuana, mm-hmm. hard drug users.
Okay.
And now that they were working and have the money, now they have an extra amount of money. What's that going to do with drugs?
So you're asking, like, when the poor people just spend their money
yes.
on. Okay. So that's more I think that's more of a biased like stereotype rather than truth, because there has been numerous studies saying that these cash transfer programs actually cause those people in poverty to make better decisions, and that's actually they spend less money on alcohol and drugs than they do without the cash transfer program. So in that case, that's why I think it's a biased stereotype. They would actually spend more money to better themselves.
Okay, and now that like people are getting that extra $1,000, what happens when they just stop working and all?
Hold on. UBI check? UBI check? No? Okay. What was your question? I'm sorry.
It was what happens to people when they get this extra money now and they just stop working and all?
Okay, so $1,000 each month just puts you just barely above the poverty line. So because of that, people will still need to work. They would still need to work to get them further above the poverty line. It's barely enough for you to live, which is the job of the UBI. So it's actually the opposite of what you just said. Like, people will actually work more.
All right, well, that's all I have for you, and thank you, Mr. Andrew.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I'm glad to be on this platform to inform the American people about the changing economy.
And so when you go out to these places, you see that the dynamism is getting sucked up by certain markets to a level that's unprecedented in our history.
Hi, my name is Andrew Yang.
What's up?
I represent the Yang Gang, and this is your UBI check for the month.
What is this?
It's your UBI check, your universal basic income. Every month you get $1,000. It's part of the freedom dividend policy.
Oh, this is sick, bro. Thank
Yes. Have a good night, guys, sir.
you. You too. Wow, this is really cool. But is it really that cool? When looking at the cultural aspect of UBI, we have to think about how it will affect productivity and happiness. Well, the one main negative effect is the productivity of the American worker. As you see, the American worker works about 40 hours a week. Now, with UBI, we can expect that productivity will go down because they will have less or more money to spend on other things while they don't have to work for it. This overall reduces the standard of living. According to the Economic Policies Institute, productivity is the strongest factor in determining standard of living. And one may argue that UBI can replace the lost income with the lost productivity. According to this chart right here, a minor loss in productivity leads to a major loss in income. And given the $1,000 by Andrew Yang here, it will not cover those costs that are lost. Now, when looking at a positive impact of UBI, we have mental health. And it is shown that as a worker works less, their mental health increases and becomes better. With the decrease in work hours and an increase in happiness, people have more time for leisure and other activities. A study done by a reporter, his name is Ben Schiller, he gave 20 individuals $250 a week, and later he interviewed them and reported what they spent their money on. Many of them spent their money on starting a business, art, focusing on health, getting over addiction, education, even starting a farm, and also buying a house. This may seem productive, but as a whole, the economics of it are not very positive. Want to play a game?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Andrew Yang. I'm running the 2020 campaign. One of my policies is the freedom dividend, and this is the UBI check that's listed under the freedom dividend. Every month you get $1,000.
$1,000.
Yes, you can spend on whatever you want. It helps benefit the government's economy and everything.
Wait, so like, no questions asked?
No question, it's just $1,000. It's up to you to spend it, whatever you want. You can save it, you can spend it, whatever. It's just to help the government with taxes.
Well, thank you.
Have a nice day, sir.
You too. Economics-wise, UBI in the long term will cancel itself out after the short-term benefits. Let's go and look at a chart to understand why this is. To illustrate some of the inflationary effects, we're going to start off by drawing a basic supply and demand curve. Alright, so supply, and then we have demand, okay? So we're going to do this on something basic like the price
of milk. Okay, so obviously higher it goes on here, the more it costs. And then this is the quantity of milk, okay? So higher quantity, more to the right. So first off, when you get $1,000 a month, you're going to have more demand for things. This is shown by some of the research that they did in Finland and Canada. So this would push out the demand curve for milk, initially raising the prices here. So this is actually demand 2. So now we have a higher price for milk. Now that people have more money, they have more demand. But with the 10%, that's without the 10% value added tax. With the 10% value added tax, that is going to actually decrease our supply curve. So that's going to push our supply curve back, and that is really going to raise prices more to a, so we started down here, and we ended up here. So I should also add that the supply goes down not only because of the value added tax, but because of the decrease in productivity. So in Finland and Canada, when they did their trials with in Finland it was about 2,000 people, a lot of them reported having the luxury of being able to take off from work and going on vacations, having the flexibility to do that. So that would also lead in a decrease in our supply thanks to a decrease in productivity. So that basically illustrates some of the effects from inflation that we see here. When you have more money, it's really just going to cancel out, and your real amount of money is going to stay the same while your nominal amount of money is going to increase. So like in North Ridgewell, we have $70,000 annual average income. That would raise to about $82,000 every year. That's $12,000 a year in universal basic income. So, but in reality, it's going to stay about the same with inflation, plus that 2% every year that we see thanks to the Federal Reserve.
So we're talking about inflation here.
So, Andrew Yang, if you look at the graph here, the quantity of milk is going to stay about the same, but because of the decrease in productivity and the increase in demand, our price is going to go up, and in the long term, it's really just going to inflate the prices.
I see. Hi, sir. This is a part of the Freedom Dividend. This is your UBI check.
What is this?
It's $1,000 in
That sounds pretty good to me. Thank you, sir.
Have a nice day, sir.
Yes, sir.
So that's one person to go. There's a lot more people that I have to give money to.
Now, as my previous compadre has recently stated, the federal budget is a very important aspect we have to deal with when we're talking about the UBI subject. And I'll come here to show you my budget graphs here and my pie charts.
Hi.
Anywho, if we look here at the fiscal year 2017, which is the most recent of our fiscal years that we have good information on how we've spent, we can see that spending amounts for $4 trillion. Total government spending, this includes mandatory spending, discretionary spending, and interest that we pay on loans. Now we come over here to revenue. We only received $3.3 trillion in revenue, 49% of which comes directly out of the consumer's pockets and income taxes. UBI essentially is a negative income tax, but we already are paying these income taxes. So we're basically, what UBI is doing is just giving us our income tax back. Anyways, that's besides the point. $700 billion have been borrowed to fix this problem where our spending outpaces our revenue here. If we look over here at spending here, mandatory, 63% of it. This includes all the services that help the poor people that we're trying to alleviate their poverty ailments with UBI, including Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare. Medicaid, for example, pays for 70 million people's health care directly from the government. The important note here is that UBI is $3 trillion. $3 trillion for UBI here. That's a crazy amount. You're going to add plus $3 trillion to the spending, which means that's $7.0 trillion if you're not cutting anything. from the fiscal year 2017. You're missing out on $3.7 trillion here, where we cannot borrow $3.7 trillion to cover this cost, because if you're borrowing at that insane rate, which is over half of your spending, what's going to happen is interest costs, because you're paying back interest on loans, that's going to push out progressively. It's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's going to eat into our discretionary spending. We can't eat into our mandatory spending because that is mandatory spending. But once we get to the point where we're borrowing that much and it keeps eating and eating and eating, we're eventually going to get to the point where we're paying massive amounts on our spending on interest. And we're going to start eating into the mandatory spending over and over. And this is what happens with governments. It happened with Greece. What happens is they borrow way too much as a percentage of their spending, and they can't afford to spend on their necessities. So they have to default on their actual loans that they took out, and that means that countries have credit scores too, and their credit score for their country drops down to basically zero, and no banks, private banks, they won't want to loan to these governments anymore, to our government, because we defaulted on our loans. Of course, what Andrew Yang's not proposing that we should borrow $3.7 trillion every year. Andrew Yang is proposing that we establish a VAT tax, which according to his calculations will give us plus $2 trillion onto our revenue sources. So that's $5.3 trillion. However, as my friend previously has illustrated, a VAT tax is just taking away from suppliers and it's increasing their input costs overall. They have to raise those prices, which means price levels go up for people, and the actual input is going down as well. The UBI that we will receive when they spend it on products and stuff for people will, according to Yang's calculations, increase it by 500 billion. So we have 5.8 trillion now for our total revenue, and so we have $7.0 trillion in spending and $5.8 trillion in revenue. Again, we'd still have to borrow at this point $1.2 trillion, which is, of course, is far cry from the previous amount of $3.7 trillion that we were borrowing. But it's very important to note that that is still a very crazy high amount that will totally increase this interest rate that we were, or the amount of interest that we're paying back on our loans. And the last thing to point out about Andrew Yang's plan to afford this is that he proposes that we defund certain programs. Now, he isn't really clear which programs we should defund, but as illustrated previously, 63% of our budget is mandatory. If he's talking about, say, defunding the military, if we just take out the entire military's budget of $648 billion, that's still not even coming close to bringing this gap down, and we're going to be still borrowing regardless, and we're going to be borrowing at our rates that are currently unhealthy for us, for our government as is, and we're just going to be increasing that price. So UBI on a federal level, when we're talking about federal spending and federal revenue and the federal budget as a whole, is just not practical.
Andrew Yang, although your idea of UBI is good for mental health and the social aspect,
pragmatically speaking, economically, it just really doesn't work. You can't see, it doesn't help the economy in any way, shape, or form. It actually hurts poor people that you want to help. Spending, we cannot really afford this policy. I hope you understand that.
But I don't care.